Barbara Myerhoff's book Number Our Days is a classic in anthropological fieldwork and later became an Academy Award-winning documentary film. Her first book, Peyote Hunt, traces the religious pilgrimage of the Huichol Indians across the Sierra Madre of Mexico. But in Number Our Days, excerpted below, Myerhoff turns her attention closer to home. Her fieldwork focuses on the struggles of older Jewish immigrants in a Southern California community and the Elias Senior Citizens Center. Her rich ethnography brings the neighborhood, the center, and its members to life. The members' vibrant voices fill the pages. Myerhoff also takes a reflexive approach and becomes a character in her own book, detailing her fieldwork process and reflecting poignantly on her experience as a younger Jewish woman studying a community of older Jews. As she says, "I would never really be a Huichol Indian. But I would be a little old Jewish lady one day. I consider myself very fortunate in having had, through this work, an opportunity to anticipate, rehearse, and contemplate my own future." Number Our Days marks a turn in anthropology from the study of the other to the study of the self, what Victor Turner calls in his foreword to Myerhoff's book Being Thrice Born. The first birth is in our own culture. The second birth immerses the anthropologist in the depths of another culture through fieldwork. Finally, the return home is like a third birth as the anthropologist rediscovers his or her own culture, now strange and unfamiliar in a global context. Death and the ocean are protagonists in Basha's life. They provide points of orientation, comforting in their certitude. One visible, the other invisible, neither hostile nor friendly, they accompany her as she walks down the boardwalk to the Elias Senior Citizens Center. Basha wants to remain independent above all. Her life at the beach depends on her ability to perform a minimum number of basic tasks. She must shop and cook, dress herself, care for her body in her one-room apartment, walk, take the bus to the market and the doctor, be able to make a telephone call in case of emergency. Her arthritic hands have a difficult time with the buttons on her dress. Some days her fingers ache and swell so that she cannot fit them into the holes of the telephone dial. Her hands shake as she puts in her eye drops for glaucoma. Fortunately, she no longer has to give herself injections for her diabetes. Now it is controlled by pills, if she is careful about what she eats. In the neighborhood there are no large markets within walking distance. She must take the bus to shop. The bus steps are very high and sometimes the driver objects when she tries to bring her little wheeled cart aboard. A small boy whom she has befriended and occasionally pays often waits for her at the bus stop to help her up. When she cannot bring her cart onto the bus or isn't helped up the steps, she must walk to the market. Then shopping takes the better part of the day and exhausts her. Her feet, thank God, give her less trouble since she figured out how to cut and sew a pair of cloth shoes so as to leave room for her calluses and bunions. Basha's daughter calls her once a week and worries about her mother living alone and in a deteriorated neighborhood. "Don't worry about me, darling. This morning I put the garbage in the oven and the bagels in the trash. But I'm feeling fine." Basha enjoys teasing her daughter whose distant concern she finds somewhat embarrassing. She says to me, "Mamali, you're sweet but you're so stupid." What else could a greenhorn mother expect from a daughter who is a lawyer? The statement conveys Basha's simultaneous pride and grief in having produced an educated, successful child whose very accomplishments drastically separate her from her mother. The daughter has often invited Basha to come and live with her, but she refuses. Quote, "What would I do with myself there in her big house, alone all day, when the children are at work? No one to talk to. No place to walk. Nobody talks Yiddish. My daughter's husband doesn't like my cooking, so I can't even help with meals. Who needs an old lady around, somebody else for my daughter to take care of? They don't keep the house warm like I like it. When I go to the bathroom at night, I'm afraid to flush, I shouldn't wake anybody up. Here I have lived for 31 years. I have my friends. I have the fresh air. Always there are people to talk to on the benches. I can go to the center whenever I like and always there's something doing there. As long as I can manage for myself, I'll stay here. Unquote. Managing means three things: taking care of herself, stretching her monthly pension of $320 to cover expenses, and filling her time in ways that have meaning for her. The first two are increasingly hard, and she knows that they are battles she will eventually lose. But her free time does not weigh on her. She is never bored and rarely depressed. In many ways, life is not different from before. She has never been well off, and she never expected things to be easy. When asked if she is happy, she, Basha, like many of the 300 or so elderly members of the Aliyah Center, was Bam and spent much of her childhood in one of the small, predominantly Jewish, Yiddish-speaking villages known as shtetls, located within the Pale of Settlement of Tsarist Russia, an area to which almost half the world's Jewish population was confined in the 19th century. Desperately poor, regularly terrorized by outbreaks of anti-Semitism initiated by government officials and surrounding peasants, shtetl life was precarious. Yet a rich, highly developed culture flourished in these encapsulated settlements, based on a shared sacred religious history, common customs and beliefs, and two languages: Hebrew for prayer and Yiddish for daily life. For many, life became unbearable under the increasingly reactionary regime of Tsar Alexander II. The pogroms of 1881 to 1882, accompanied by severe economic and legal restrictions, drove out the more desperate and daring of the Jews. Soon they were leaving the shtetls and the cities in droves. The exodus of Jews from Eastern Europe swelled rapidly until by the turn of the century hundreds of thousands were emigrating, the majority to seek freedom and opportunity in the New World. Basha dresses simply but with care. The purchase of each item of clothing is a major decision. It must last, should be modest and appropriate to her age, but gay and up-to-date. And, of course, it can't be too costly. Basha is not quite 5 feet tall. She is a sturdy boat of a woman, wide, strong of frame, and heavily corseted. She navigates her great monobosom before her, supported by broad hips and thin, severely bowed legs, their shape the heritage of her malnourished childhood. Like most of the people who belong to the Aliyah Center, her early life in Eastern Europe was characterized by relentless poverty. Basha dresses for the cold, even though she is now living in Southern California, wearing a babushka under a red sun hat, a sweater under her heavy coat. She moves down the boardwalk steadily, paying attention to the placement of her feet. A fall is common and dangerous for the elderly. A fractured hip can mean permanent disability, loss of autonomy, and removal from the community to a convalescent or old-age home. Basha seats herself on a bench in front of the center and waits for friends. Her feet are spread apart, well planted, as if growing up from the cement. Even sitting quite still, there is an air of determination about her. She will withstand attacks by anti-Semites, Cossacks, Nazis, historical enemies whom she conquers by outliving. She defies time and weather. So she might have sat a century ago, before a small pyramid of potatoes or herring in the marketplace of the Polish town where she was born. Patient, resolute, she is a survivor. Not all the center women are steady boats like Basha. Some, like Fagel, are leaves, so delicate, dry, and vulnerable that it seems at any moment they might be whisked away by a strong gust. And one day, a sudden wind did knock Fagel to the ground. Others, like Gita, are birds, small and sharp-tongued. Quick, witty, vain, flirtatious, they are very fond of singing and dancing. They once were and will always be pretty girls. This is one of their survival strategies. Boats, leaves, or birds, at first their faces look alike. Individual features are blurred by dentures, heavy bifocals, and webs of wrinkles. The men are not so easy to categorize. As a group, they are quieter, more uniform, less immediately outstanding except for the few who are distinctive individuals, clearly distinguishable as leaders. As the morning wears on, the benches fill. Benches are attached back to back, one side facing the ocean, one side the boardwalk. The people on the ocean side swivel around to face their friends, the boardwalk, and the center. Bench behavior is highly stylized. The half-dozen or so benches immediately to the north and south of the center are the territory of the members, segregated by sex and conversation topic. The men's benches are devoted to abstract, ideological concerns, philosophical debate, politics, religion, and economics. The women's benches are given more to talk about immediate, personal matters: children, food, health, neighbors, love affairs, scandals, and managing. Men and women talk about Israel and its welfare, about being a Jew, and about center politics. On the benches, reputations are made and broken, controversies explored, leaders selected, factions formed and dissolved. Here is the outdoor dimension of center life, like a village plaza, a focus of protracted, intense sociability. The surrounding scene rarely penetrates the invisible, pulsing membrane of the center community. The old people are too absorbed in their own talk to attend the setting. Surfers, sunbathers, children, dogs, bicyclists, winos, hippies, voyeurs, photographers, panhandlers, artists, junkies, roller skaters, peddlers, and police are omnipresent all year round. Every social class, age, race, and sexual preference is represented. Jesus cults, Hare Krishna parades, sidewalk preachers jostle steel bands and itinerant musicians. As colorful and flamboyant as the scene is by day, it is as dangerous by night. Muggings, theft, rape, harassment, and occasional murders make it a perilous neighborhood for the old people after dark. Around 30 years ago, Jews from all over the country began to immigrate to the beach community, particularly those with health problems and newly retired. Seeking a benign climate, fellow Jews, and moderately priced housing, they brought their savings and small pensions and came to live near the ocean. Collective life was and still is especially intense in this community because there is no automobile traffic on the boardwalk. Here is a place where people may meet, gather, talk, and stroll, simple but basic and precious activities that the elderly in particular can enjoy here all year round. In the late 1950s, an urban development program resulted in the displacement of between 4,000 and 6,000 of these senior citizens in a very short period. It was a devastating blow to the culture. A second Holocaust, Sasha called it. It destroyed our shtetl life all over again. Soon after the urban development project began, a marina was constructed at the southern end of the boardwalk. Property values soared. Older people could not pay taxes and many lost their homes. Rents quadrupled. Old hotels and apartments were torn down, and housing became the single most serious problem from number of days for the elderly who desperately wanted to remain in the area. While several thousand have managed to hang on, no new members are moving into the area because of the housing problem. Their Yiddish world, built up over a 30-year period, is dying and complete extinction is imminent. Perhaps it will last another 5 or at the most 10 years. Whenever a center member leaves, everyone is acutely aware that there will be no replacements. The sense of cultural doom coincides with awareness of approaching individual death. As the numbers of such people shrink and the neighborhood changes, the Aliyah Center becomes more and more important to its members. Sponsored by a citywide philanthropic Jewish organization, it is maintained as a day center that emphasizes secular Judaism. Officially, about 300 members pay dues of $6 a year, but these figures do not reflect the actual importance of the center to the community. Many more use it than join, and they use it all day, every day. The center is more halfway house than voluntary association, making it possible for hundreds of people to continue living alone in the open community, despite their physical and economic difficulties. Daily hot meals are provided there, and continuous diverse programs are offered: cultural events, discussions, classes of all kinds, along with social affairs, religious ceremonies, celebrations of life crises, anniversaries, birthdays, memorials, and occasional weddings. The gamut of political and social processes found in larger societies are well developed in center life. Here is an entire, though miniature, society, a Blakean world in a grain of sand, the setting for an intricate and rich culture, made up of bits and pieces of people's common history. I sat on the benches outside the center and thought about how strange it was to be back in the neighborhood where 16 years before I had lived and for a time had been a social worker with elderly citizens on public relief. Then the area was known as Oshini Beach. The word Shini still made me cringe. As a child I had been taunted with it. Like many second-generation Americans, I wasn't sure what being a Jew meant. When I was a child our family had avoided the words Jew and Yid. We were confused and embarrassed about our background. In public we lowered our voices when referring to our people or one of us. I had made no conscious decision to explore my roots or clarify the meaning of my origins. I was one of several anthropologists at the University of Southern California engaged in an examination of ethnicity and aging. At first I planned to study elderly Chicanos, since I had previously done fieldwork in Mexico. But in the early 1970s in urban America, ethnic groups were not welcoming curious outsiders, and people I approached kept asking me, "Why work with us? Why don't you study your own kind?" This was a new idea to me. I had not been trained for such a project. Anthropologists conventionally investigate exotic, remote, preliterate societies. But such groups are increasingly unavailable and often inhospitable. As a result, more and more anthropologists are sitting in the sun and contemplating the passing parade on the boardwalk that morning in 1973. I wondered how I should begin this study. At 11:30 the benches began to empty as old people entered the center for a hot kosher meal nutritious 65, then a new program provided by state and private funds. I followed the crowd inside and sat at the back of the warm, noisy room redolent with odors of fish and chicken soup, wondering how to introduce myself. It was decided for me. A woman sat down next to me who I soon learned was Basha. In a leisurely fashion, she appraised me. Uncomfortable, I smiled and said hello. "You are not hungry?" she asked. "No, thank you, I'm not," I answered. "So, what brings you here?" "I'm from the University of Southern California. I'm looking for a place to study how older Jews live in the city." At the word university, she moved closer and nodded approvingly. "Are you Jewish?" she asked. "Yes, I am." "Are you married?" she persisted. "Yes." "You got children?" "Yes, 2 boys, 4 and 8, I answered. "Are you teaching them to be Jews?" "I'm trying." "So what do you want with us here?" asked Basha. "Well, I want to understand your life, find out what it's like to be older and Jewish, what makes Jews different from other older people, if anything. I'm an anthropologist and we usually study people's cultures and societies. I think I would like to learn about this culture." "And what will you do for us?" she asked me. "I could teach a class in something people here are interested in, how older people live in other places, perhaps." "Are you qualified to do this?" Basha shot me a suspicious glance. "I have a Ph.D. and have taught in the university for a number of years, so I suppose I am qualified." "You are a professor then? A little bit of a thing like you?" To my relief, she chuckled amiably. Perhaps I had passed my first rite of entrance into the group. The anthropologist engages in peculiar work. He or she tries to understand a different culture to the point of finding it to be intelligible, regardless of how strange it seems in comparison with one's own background. This is accomplished by attempting to experience the new culture from within, living in it for a time as a member, all the while maintaining sufficient detachment to observe and analyze it with some objectivity. This peculiar posture, being inside and outside at the same time, is called participant observation. It is a fruitful paradox, one that has allowed anthropologists to find sense and purpose within a society's seemingly illogical and arbitrary customs and beliefs. This assumption of the native's viewpoint, so to speak, is a means of knowing others through oneself, a professional technique that can be mastered fairly easily in the study of very different peoples. Working with one's own society, and more specifically, those of one's own ethnic and familial heritage, is perilous, and much more difficult. Yet it has a certain validity and value not available in other circumstances. Identifying with the other Indians, Chicanos, if one is Anglo, blacks if one is white, males if one is female is an act of imagination, a means for discovering what one is not and will never be. Identifying with what one is now and will be someday is quite a different process. In working among the elderly also, I suspect, among the very young an exceptionally important part of one's information is derived from nonverbal communication and identification, this because the bodily state is such a large determinant of well-being for the growing and declining organism. At various times, I consciously tried to heighten my awareness of the physical feeling state of the elderly by wearing stiff garden gloves to perform ordinary tasks, taking off my glasses and plugging my ears, slowing down my movements and sometimes by wearing the heaviest shoes I could find to the center. Walking a few blocks to the day-old bakery in this condition became an unimaginably exhilarating achievement. Once by accident I stumbled slightly. The flash of actual terror I experienced was shocking. From the close watching of the elderly it seems I had acquired their assiduous need to avoid falling, though of course, to one my age and good health such a minor accident presents no real danger. This recognition occurred after I had been watching two very old women walk down the alley with great concentration, arms tightly linked, navigating impediments in slow-motion movements that were perfectly coordinated and mutually supportive. So great was their concern with balance they might have been walking a high wire. The work with the very old people at the center was not the first time I had employed this imaginative identification as a source of information. Years before, in doing fieldwork with the Huacal Indians of Mexico, I had had similar experiences. However, much I learned from that was limited by the fact that I would never really be a Huacal Indian. But I would be a little old Jewish lady one day, thus, it was essential for me to learn what that condition was like, in all its particulars. As a society, we are increasingly cut off from the elderly. We do not have them in the midst of our daily lives, and consequently have no regular access to models of successful old age. How can we then do anything but dread the coming of age? I consider myself very fortunate in having had, through this work, an opportunity to anticipate, rehearse, and contemplate my own future. What the center people taught me went beyond knowledge about old age. In addition, they provided a model of an alternative lifestyle, built on values in many ways antithetical to those commonly esteemed by contemporary Americans. The usual markers of success were anathema to them: wealth, power, physical beauty, youth, mobility, security, social status. All were out of the question. Lacking hope for change, improvement, without a future, they had devised a counterworld, inventing their own version of what made the good life. It was built on their veneration for their religious and cultural membership, and it was full of meaning, intensity, and consciousness. This they had managed on their own, creating a nearly invisible, run-down, tiny world, containing a major lesson for any who would attend it. It was not the first time that an anthropologist had found in obscure, unworldly folk a message of wide applicability for the larger outside society. The amount and variety of information accumulated in a field study is overwhelming. There is no definite or correct solution to the problem of what to include, how to cut up the pie of social reality, when precisely to leave or stop. Often there is little clarity as to whom to include as members, what to talk about with those who are. The deliberate avoidance of preconceptions is likely to result in the best fieldwork, allowing the group or subject to dictate the form the description ultimately takes. But always there is a high degree of arbitrariness involved. Choices must be made, and they are extremely difficult, primarily because of what and who must be omitted. In this case, these methodological dilemmas were especially troublesome. Nearly everyone at the center wanted to be included, feeling so strongly as they did the wish to be recorded and remembered. In this work I decided to concentrate on the center, its internal affairs, and its most active members as much as possible. This eliminated the non-joiners, the marginal individuals, the majority of people living in the neighborhood and, accordingly, limited the generalizations that I could make in the end. I decided not to compare center elders with others. I felt the center people and their generation were sufficiently unique to warrant most of my time. The choice favored depth over breadth, tight focus rather than representativeness. Of the 300 center members, I met and talked with about half, though I observed all at one time or another during the years of the study. Of these, I knew 80 personally, and interviewed and spent most of my time with 36. I tape-recorded extensive interviews with these, ranging from 2 to 16 hours, visited nearly all in their homes, took trips with them from time to time outside the neighborhood to doctors, social workers, shopping, funerals, visiting their friends in old age homes and hospitals, and often following my subjects to convalescent homes and hospitals. I went to many funerals and memorial services. Apart from these excursions and my interviews with outsiders who knew center people well, teachers, rabbis, local politicians, volunteers, I concentrated on the center and its external extensions, the benches, boardwalk, and hotel and apartment lobbies where they congregated. As often happens, I established a particularly strong and gratifying attachment to one individual, and also as often happens, in addition to being particularly knowledgeable and articulate about the community, this person was also an outsider. Shmuel the philosophe, he was called, and in a very significant way he was my teacher, critic, and guide. His voice is heard throughout the book. I have included my own voice for it proved impossible to expunge. His statements and retorts did not make sense without that, for he was directing his commentary to me. That is not the only place I have included my words and reactions. For a long time I resisted this. I wanted to focus on the center, not myself, but it became clear that what was being written was from my eyes, with my personality, biases, history, and sensibility, and it seemed dishonest to exclude that, thereby giving an impression of greater objectivity and authority than I believed in. As often as possible I have included verbatim materials, heavily edited and selected, inevitably, but sufficient to allow the reader some degree of direct participation. I have tried to allow many individuals to emerge in their fullness and distinctiveness rather than presenting a completely generalized picture of group life without reference to the living, breathing people who comprise it, and who are in the end the only reality. In the interest of economy and privacy, I have combined several of the minor characters who appear on these pages, though most would have preferred to have been identified. Wherever possible I have altered identifying biographical features that seemed insignificant. All verbatim statements are presented as they were given, usually taken from tape recordings. Major figures are disguised as much as possible but uncombined. Events reported are actual occurrences, subjectively witnessed and interpreted by me. The always complex problem of assuring privacy to one's subjects was made more difficult in this study because of the production of a documentary film on which I collaborated with Lynn Littman toward the end of research. Also called Number Our Days, it was based on my fieldwork at the center. We were not at all sure that the film would cross the ethnic barrier, and were surprised when it was widely viewed and enthusiastically received. To our great satisfaction, it brought the elderly concrete benefits in many forms: unsolicited funds, attention and favors from strangers and friends, and above all, visibility, which they so long for. But it made effective disguise of the center and its director impossible. Nevertheless, privacy for individuals could be preserved, and so I have changed all names of people and groups mentioned here, this to allow myself freedom to record some of the unflattering things I saw there, as much as possible to prevent the elderly from recognizing themselves and each other, to save them and their children any embarrassment that might accrue. Certainly, I did not want to cause the old people pain that could be avoided, nor did I wish to jeopardize my welcome among them. The format of this book is designed to meet several purposes. In addition to wanting to speak within it as a participant, and wishing to preserve particular individuals, I wanted to render the elders' speech. Many verbatim statements are included. The most extensive of these are called Bobmaise or grandmother's tales, speeches and exchanges between people that occurred in a living history class. The Bobmaise were drawn from miles of tape, intended to convey the texture of the speech, people's characteristic thought, and interaction style. It was Shmuel, the critic and philosopher, who dubbed these stories and exchanges Bob Myerhoff. He found them inelegant and rambling. Sometimes they build to a significant point about center people's beliefs and experiences, but even so, these are much embedded in trivia. Seldom grand, occasionally self-serving, always vital and original, it was inconceivable to leave them out. Center people, like so many of the elderly, were very fond of reminiscing and storytelling, eager to be heard from, eager to relate parts of their life history. More afraid of oblivion than pain or death, they always sought opportunities to become visible. They narrated themselves perpetually, in the form of keeping notes, journals, writing poems and reflections spontaneously, and also telling their stories to whoever would listen. Their histories were not devoted to marking their successes or unusual merits. Rather, they were efforts at ordering, sorting, explaining, rendering coherent their long life, finding, integrating ideas and characteristics that helped them know themselves as the same person over time, despite great ruptures and shifts. I was eager to respond to center people's desires to tell me their stories and puzzled as to how to find the means and the time to listen to as many as possible. Abe was helpful here, too. He suggested that I offer a class in the center where people could assemble for recounting their life history. We pondered the subject together and decided it should be called Living History. People would have an opportunity to bring in their writings, poems, and the like, and read them to the group, an activity they enjoyed greatly and found few opportunities for in the center's crowded schedule. They might bring in photographs, letters, and any materials they wished to have included. But, I wondered, would people be willing to tell me, a stranger, their life history, and would they be inhibited if I tried to tape record the sessions? Abe and I sat on a bench talking about the class in the early days of my work. Basha came out of the center and Abe called to her, "Basha, how would you like to have the professor make a book from your life?" Basha did not hesitate. "You got a pencil? You want to get it down right. I begin with my childhood in Poland. Tell me if I go too fast." Naturally, it's a long story. The following month, classes began. I was prepared with cookies, tea, coffee, tape recorder, and 24 notebooks and pencils for people who would be willing to use them at home. At first a half-dozen people came, but after the word spread that there were no political fights and no insistence on public disclosure of personal matters, more attended. Soon a core of about 20 people had formed and they came faithfully. The longer the classes lasted, the more people had to say. They stimulated one another's memories. I loved these classes and the style of the exchanges and stories. Shmuel was right to call them grandmother's tales, for they were the kind of rambling, bubbling, unfocused, running comments that a Bob might tell her grandchildren without putting down her dough or her sewing. Too busy to stop and shape a tale with grace and art, but too alive to imagination and verbal expression to be silent, so she might weave a kitchen tale that despite its crude surface, came from and went to a deep place. Hitting on a format that allowed for storytelling was a fortunate accident. When we began the sessions, there was no way I could have anticipated the significance of these exchanges. In time it became clear that storytelling was a passion among these people, absolutely central to their culture. The center people who came to the living history classes were increasingly pleased with the storytelling sessions. Here is Rachel's comment on the class toward the end of our meetings. "All these speeches we are making reminded me of a picture I have from many years ago, when we were still in Russia. My brother had been gone already 2 years in America. I can see my mother like it is before me, engraved in my head. A small house she goes out of, in wintertime, going every morning in the snow to the post office, wrapped up in a shawl. Every morning there was nothing. Finally, she found a letter. In that letter was written, 'Mamali, I didn't write to you before because I didn't have nothing to write about. So, she says, why didn't you write and tell me? You know, this group of ours reminds me of that letter.' When I first heard about this group, I thought to myself, what can I learn? What can I hear that I don't know, about life in the old country, of the struggles, the life in the poor towns, in the bigger towns, of the rich people and the poor people? What is there to learn? I'm 88, that I haven't seen myself. Then I think, what can I give to anybody else? I'm not an educated woman. It's a waste of time. That was my impression. But then I came here and heard all those stories. I knew them, but you know it was laid down deep, deep in your mind, with all those troubles mixed. You know it's there but you don't think of it, because sometimes you don't want to live in your past. Who needs all these foolish stories? But finally, this group brought out such beautiful memories, not always so beautiful, but still, all the pictures came up. It touched the layers of the kind that it was on those dead people already. It was laying on them like layers, separate layers of earth, and all of a sudden in this class I feel it coming up like lava. It just melted away the earth from all those people. It melted away, and they became alive. And then to me it looked like they were never dead. Then I felt like the time my mother got that letter. Why don't you come and tell me? Well, I have nothing to say, I think. But I start to say it and I find something. The memories come up in me like lava. So I felt I enriched myself. And I am hoping maybe I enriched somebody else. All this, it's not only for us. It's for the generations.